After an accident leaves Sophia paralyzed, her marriage begins to crumble under the weight of resentment and neglect. When her husband Ethan walks out, Sophia is left to rebuild her life alone, but as she rises from the ashes, Ethan's world falls apart. Years later, their roles reversed, Ethan returns, seeking redemption from the woman he once abandoned. But some betrayals cannot be undone, and Sophia must decide whether forgiveness is a second chance or a final goodbye. Before we get started, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more exciting content, and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Now, let's dive in. The early morning light filtered through the curtains, casting golden streaks across the bedroom. Sophia stirred awake, instinctively reaching out to the other side of the bed, but her hand touched nothing but cold sheets. Ethan had already left for work. A few years ago, mornings were different, filled with warmth, cuddles, and whispered dreams for the future. Back then, Ethan would linger a bit longer, wrapping his arms around her, promising the world. Now, silence greeted her. The warmth of those mornings was a distant memory, replaced by indifference that stung deeper than words ever could. Sophia struggled to sit up, pulling her wheelchair closer with practiced ease. It wasn't always like this. Before the accident, she had been vibrant, active, and fiercely independent. Her life had been a whirlwind of possibilities, an unfinished master's degree, weekend adventures, and late-night brainstorming sessions for her art business. Then, everything changed. The accident stole more than just her ability to walk, it robbed her of her dreams, her autonomy, and, most painfully, her relationship with Ethan. In the beginning, he was supportive. He stayed by her side through grueling therapy sessions and hospital stays, promising they would get through it together. But promises have an expiration date, and Ethan's patience wore thin as the months dragged on. The first sign of his withdrawal had been subtle. Missed therapy appointments, arriving home late from work with flimsy excuses, the occasional snap of frustration when Sophia asked for help with things she used to manage on her own. Little by little, love withered under the weight of unspoken resentments. Ethan began avoiding her altogether, throwing himself into his career with a zeal that bordered on obsession. Promotions and accolades at work seemed to fill the void that Sophia's condition had created in his heart. And Sophia? She became invisible, a part of the furniture, something to be dealt with rather than cherished. One evening, after another late night at the office, Ethan returned home to find Sophia waiting for him in the living room. Her expression was tired, but determined. "Ethan, we need to talk," she said softly. He sighed, rubbing his temples as if she were a problem he could solve with enough effort. "Not tonight, Sophia. I'm exhausted." "No," she said, firmer this time. "We can't keep pretending everything is fine. You've been distant for months. I need to know where we stand." He threw his briefcase onto the couch, frustration bubbling to the surface. "Where we stand? What do you want me to say, Sophia? This isn't the life I signed up for." The words hit her like a slap. She blinked, stunned into silence for a moment, and then anger began to simmer beneath the surface. "I didn't sign up for this either, Ethan," she shot back. "Do you think I wanted to end up in a wheelchair? But I'm still here. I'm still me." He laughed bitterly, the sound devoid of humor. "No, you're not. You're not the same woman I fell in love with. You're someone else now. And I can't do this anymore." The finality in his voice shattered something inside her. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them away, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. "So that's it," she whispered. "You're just going to walk away?" Ethan's face twisted with guilt, but he didn't deny it. "I can't live like this, Sophia. I need to be with someone who can keep up with me, who doesn't hold me back." The cruelty of his words left her breathless. For a moment, she thought she might faint from the sheer weight of it. But then, a strange clarity settled over her, a realization that this was the end of the life she had fought so hard to salvage. "If you walk out that door," she said quietly, "don't bother coming back." Ethan hesitated for a heartbeat, as if weighing his options. And then, without another word, he turned and left. The door clicked shut behind him, and with it, the last remnants of the life they had built together. Sophia sat there in stunned silence, listening to the hum of the city beyond the windows. The weight of his abandonment pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She felt like she was drowning in grief, anger, and betrayal, all swirling together in a chaotic storm. Hours passed, but she didn't move. It wasn't until the first light of dawn crept through the windows that the tears finally came, silent, unstoppable, and cleansing. And just like that, the life she had known was gone. Ethan had broken something between them that could never be repaired, leaving Sophia to pick up the pieces of a shattered future. But as the tears dried and the sun rose higher in the sky, she made a silent promise to herself. This was not the end of her story. It was only the beginning. The apartment felt eerily quiet without Ethan's presence, but Sophia quickly realized that the silence could either suffocate her or offer her peace. For the first few days, she let herself drown in the sadness, as if embracing the sorrow would make it leave sooner. Grief clung to her like a shadow, and for a while, the world outside seemed distant, unreachable. But soon enough, life began demanding her attention. Bills needed to be paid, groceries needed to be ordered, and the reality of being alone weighed heavier with each passing day. The first step was the hardest, deciding not to wallow but to move forward. The thought came to her in fragments: this isn't how my story ends. I will not let him define my life. Weeks turned into months. Sophia started with small goals. At first, it was as simple as getting through the day, showering, feeding herself, organizing the clutter that had accumulated in the apartment. Her friend Lily visited often, bringing food, cheerful conversation, and endless encouragement. "I know it's hard right now, but you are so much stronger than you think," Lily said one evening, squeezing Sophia's hand. Sophia nodded, though she didn't fully believe it yet. She was too numb to grasp the strength everyone claimed she had. But with every day that passed, a flicker of determination grew inside her. Her art supplies had been gathering dust in the corner of the room, untouched since the accident. On a whim, she wheeled herself toward them, picked up a brush, and let the color spill onto the canvas. The first strokes were clumsy, hesitant. She hadn't painted in so long, and it felt like learning to walk again, awkward and unsteady. But something about the process soothed her. The colors became her voice, expressing all the emotions she had no words for: anger, sadness, hope, and fear. The more she painted, the more alive she felt. Lily noticed the change almost immediately. "That's amazing, Sophia. Why don't you share these online? You've got talent. People will love your work." The thought scared Sophia at first. She had spent so long hiding from the world that the idea of putting herself out there again felt impossible. But Lily's word stayed with her, and one rainy afternoon, she finally did it. She created an online page and uploaded a few of her paintings with trembling hands, unsure of what to expect. To her surprise, the response was overwhelming. Messages flooded in, strangers praising her work, sharing how deeply the art resonated with them. It was as if every brushstroke carried a piece of her story, and people connected with that honesty. Orders for prints began trickling in, followed by commissions from customers wanting custom artwork. Sophia found herself working late into the night, painting with a passion she hadn't felt in years. It was as if each piece she created chipped away at the pain she carried, giving her back a piece of herself. Her newfound confidence extended beyond her art. Inspired by her own journey, Sophia began reaching out to online communities for people with disabilities. She shared her story, how she had been abandoned by the person she trusted most, how she fought her way back from despair, and how art saved her when everything else felt lost. Her words resonated with countless others who had felt abandoned, dismissed, or underestimated. Soon, she was invited to speak on podcasts, participate in online panels, and share her experiences as a motivational speaker. Though public speaking terrified her at first, Sophia pushed through the fear, determined to show others that life after tragedy was still worth living. The first time she spoke in front of a live virtual audience, her voice wavered with nerves. But as she told her story, unfiltered, raw, and honest, something magical happened. People listened. They empathized. They found hope in her words. And for the first time in a long while, Sophia felt seen. Not as a victim, but as a survivor. Months turned into a year. Sophia's art business flourished beyond anything she could have imagined. What started as a few small orders quickly expanded into a full-time career. Galleries reached out, asking to showcase her work, and she began selling her art nationwide. With each sale, Sophia felt a sense of pride and validation that no amount of pity or sympathy could ever provide. But it wasn't just about the business. Sophia wanted to give back, to help others find the strength she had discovered within herself. She began collaborating with non-profits, using her platform to advocate for disabled individuals. Her story became a beacon of hope, inspiring countless people to embrace their struggles and rise above them. The media soon took notice. Sophia was featured in a popular lifestyle magazine, and her story went viral on social media. Interviews followed, and she became known as a powerful voice for resilience and empowerment. The same community that once pitied her now celebrated her success, applauding her courage and determination. One day, she received a message that took her breath away. A major national conference on disability empowerment invited her to be the keynote speaker. It was an opportunity she never imagined possible, and she knew it was a moment she couldn't pass up. The night before the event, Sophia sat in her apartment, reflecting on how far she had come. The woman staring back at her from the mirror was a far cry from the broken soul Ethan had abandoned. She was stronger now, stronger than she ever thought possible. She thought of Ethan sometimes, though the memories no longer held the same power over her. Time had dulled the edges of the pain, leaving behind a quiet understanding. He had walked away, but she had found her way back to herself. And in the end, that was all that mattered. As she looked at the speech she had prepared, Sophia smiled. This was her moment, a culmination of every tear, every struggle, every triumph. She had risen from the ashes of her old life, not just surviving, but thriving. The next morning, she took the stage. The audience fell silent as she began to speak, her voice steady and clear. She shared her journey, the heartbreak, the betrayal, the fear of starting over, and the overwhelming joy of discovering her own strength. By the time she finished, the room erupted into applause. Sophia looked out at the sea of faces, each one reflecting the impact of her words, and she knew that she had made a difference. Ethan's reflection in the bathroom mirror was a ghost of the man he once was, disheveled hair, hollow eyes, and skin that looked a shade too pale under the fluorescent light. He splashed water on his face, trying to scrub away the weariness etched into every line. But no amount of water could wash away the years of poor decisions, sleepless nights, and relentless ambition that had led him to this point. He had once stood at the top of his game. Promotions, bonuses, and admiration had followed him wherever he went. But with success came greed, and with greed came shortcuts that eventually caught up with him. Now, standing in the ruins of everything he had worked for, Ethan could only reflect on how far he had fallen. It began slowly at first, the unraveling of his life. As Ethan climbed higher up the corporate ladder, his moral compass shifted. Small compromises gave way to bigger ones, cutting corners, approving unethical deals, taking credit for the work of others. He had become a master at masking the cracks beneath the surface, but nothing stays hidden forever. When a scandal erupted involving fraudulent deals under Ethan's watch, the company turned on him, eager to distance itself from the fallout. He was forced to resign in disgrace, with reporters hounding him and his reputation shredded beyond repair. Overnight, his colleagues and so-called friends disappeared, vanishing like smoke in the wind. What followed was a rapid descent into chaos. His bank accounts dwindled under the weight of legal fees, unpaid loans, and mounting debts. Ethan sold his apartment and moved into a cheap rental on the outskirts of town. The glamorous life he had built crumbled into nothing more than a fading memory, and the emptiness that followed was suffocating. But the worst was yet to come. One rainy evening, Ethan was walking home from the grocery store when disaster struck. Distracted and lost in thought, he slipped on the wet pavement. He hit the ground hard, pain shooting through his leg and back. Struggling to stand, he realized with a sinking dread that he couldn't. The doctors confirmed his fears. he had fractured several vertebrae, rendering him temporarily immobile. The irony was cruel. For years, he had seen Sophia's disability as a burden, something that defined her. Now, he found himself trapped in a similar reality, forced to experience what she must have felt, the frustration, the helplessness, the slow decay of dignity. Days stretched into weeks as he lay confined to a bed in his shabby apartment, nursing his injuries and drowning in self-pity. The phone stopped ringing. His old friends were nowhere to be found, and even casual acquaintances avoided him, unwilling to associate with a man who had lost everything. Ethan's isolation grew unbearable. He spent his days staring at the ceiling, haunted by regrets and the ghost of a life he had abandoned. And through it all, one thought nagged at him relentlessly: I left Sophia when she needed me most. And now, there's no one left for me. Ethan's savings ran out faster than he expected. With no job prospects and mounting medical bills, desperation clawed at him. He applied for disability assistance, but the process was slow, and he struggled to navigate the bureaucracy alone. It was during one particularly bleak night that the weight of his loneliness became too much to bear. Lying in bed, exhausted from pain and hunger, Ethan picked up his phone and stared at it for a long time. He scrolled through his contacts, names that once meant something to him but now felt like remnants of a different life. Most of them would ignore his calls, pretending they never knew him. But there was one name that stood out, a name he hadn't dared think about in years. Sophia. His heart pounded in his chest as he hovered over her number, guilt flooding through him. After everything he had done to her, how could he even consider calling? She had every right to hate him, to slam the door in his face without a second thought. But he had no one else. With trembling fingers, Ethan pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. He almost hung up, panic seizing him, when a familiar voice answered on the other end. Hello? For a moment, Ethan couldn't speak. Hearing Sophia's voice again, so steady, so calm, sent a wave of emotion crashing over him. Sophia, it's Ethan, he whispered, his voice hoarse. There was a long pause on the other end, and Ethan could almost hear her processing the shock. Ethan, she repeated, her voice laced with disbelief. Why are you calling me? He took a deep breath, forcing himself to confront the shame that had been festering inside him for years. I need help. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan braced himself for anger, for rejection, for the cold sting of words that would cut him down. But when Sophia finally spoke, her tone was quiet, measured. Help? Yes, Ethan admitted, his voice breaking. I know I don't deserve it. I know I hurt you. But I have no one else. The call ended with a promise to meet. Ethan didn't know what to expect, but he knew that seeing Sophia again would be like facing every mistake he had ever made. It terrified him, and yet, it was his only hope. In the days leading up to their meeting, Ethan tried to prepare himself for the encounter. But no amount of preparation could ease the weight of his guilt or the fear that she might refuse to forgive him. The day arrived, and Ethan wheeled himself into the small cafe they had agreed upon, his heart pounding in his chest. He spotted Sophia immediately, sitting by the window, her eyes scanning the room until they locked onto his. For a moment, neither of them moved. Time seemed to freeze, the weight of their shared past hanging between them like an invisible thread. Then, slowly, Sophia smiled, a small, hesitant smile that held a world of emotions. Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. He had expected anger, maybe even hatred. But what he saw in her eyes was something far more powerful. It was compassion. The cafe buzzed quietly with the hum of conversation, but for Ethan, the world had shrunk to the space between him and Sophia. He sat there, shifting uneasily in his wheelchair, aware of how vulnerable he looked. Sophia's gaze was steady, unreadable, as if she were deciding what to do with him. Ethan couldn't remember the last time he had felt so exposed. Every instinct told him to leave, to flee from the shame that weighed heavily on his chest. But this was his reckoning, a confrontation with the woman he had abandoned, now seated across from him, far stronger than he remembered. Sophia leaned back in her chair, folding her hands. So, why now, Ethan? She asked softly, though there was no hostility in her tone. Ethan swallowed hard. Because I have nowhere else to go. The admission felt like shards of glass in his throat. I lost everything. My job, my money, my friends. And then he gestured vaguely to the wheelchair. I guess life decided to show me how it feels to be on the other side. Sophia tilted her head, her expression contemplative. Karma's funny like that, she said, and though her words were calm, Ethan sensed the weight behind them. He nodded, looking down at his hands, clasped tightly in his lap. I know I don't deserve anything from you. I wanted to apologize. For everything. Leaving you, treating you the way I did. I don't know what I was thinking back then. I was scared, selfish. And you ran, Sophia finished for him. Ethan closed his eyes, the shame almost unbearable. Yes. For a moment, Sophia said nothing, and Ethan braced himself for the inevitable rejection. But instead, she sighed, a long, weary sound, as though she was letting go of something that had weighed on her for years. You know, she began, I spent a long time hating you. Not just for leaving, but for making me feel like I wasn't enough. Like my disability made me unworthy of love. I told myself that if I ever saw you again, I'd throw all that anger in your face. Ethan winced. I wouldn't blame you if you did. But then, Sophia paused, her gaze softening. I realized that holding on to that anger only kept me trapped. You left, and I survived. I built a life for myself without you. And I'm proud of that. Her words were like a knife to Ethan's heart, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Sophia had flourished in his absence, becoming everything he hadn't seen in her when he walked away. I'm sorry, Ethan whispered again, the words feeling inadequate, but all he had to offer. I know I can't undo what I did. But I need you to know that I regret it. Every day. Sophia regarded him quietly, as if weighing his sincerity. What do you need from me, Ethan? She asked at last, her voice gentle but direct. Ethan hesitated, unsure how much to ask. I don't expect anything from you. I could use some help finding a job. A way to start over. The request hung in the air between them, fragile and uncertain. Sophia drummed her fingers lightly on the table, lost in thought. After what felt like an eternity, she spoke. I can't pretend that things between us can go back to the way they were. Too much has happened. But, she exhaled slowly. I believe in second chances. Not because you deserve one, but because helping people, even those who hurt me, is part of who I am. Ethan stared at her, stunned by the kindness in her words. I don't know how to thank you, he murmured. You can start by not wasting it, Sophia replied with a small smile. Over the next few weeks, Sophia reached out to contacts she had made through her advocacy work. She found Ethan a job, nothing glamorous, but enough to help him get back on his feet. It was a humbling experience for Ethan, working a modest desk job with none of the prestige he once commanded. But for the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar, a strange sense of peace. He moved through each day with quiet determination, learning to rebuild his life one step at a time. The job gave him structure, but it was Sophia's quiet encouragement that gave him hope. She never offered more than friendship, and Ethan knew better than to ask for anything beyond that. They met occasionally for coffee or lunch, exchanging stories about their lives, but the boundaries were clear. Sophia was not the same woman he had left behind, and he was no longer the man she had once loved. As the months passed, Ethan began volunteering at the same advocacy group Sophia worked with. His experiences had given him a new perspective on disability and the struggles people faced. For the first time in his life, he found himself caring about something beyond his own success. It wasn't easy. There were days when the guilt still gnawed at him, when he wondered if he would ever truly redeem himself. But slowly, he learned that redemption wasn't about erasing the past, it was about building a better future. And in that future, Ethan knew one thing for certain, he would never take kindness for granted again. One afternoon, after wrapping up a volunteer session, Ethan found Sophia waiting for him outside the center. She smiled as he wheeled toward her, a familiar warmth in her gaze. "How's the new job treating you?" she asked. "Better than I expected," Ethan admitted, a hint of humor in his voice. "I think I'm finally starting to figure out this whole humility thing." Sophia chuckled. "Good. It suits you." They sat together in companionable silence, watching the world go by. For the first time in years, Ethan felt content, not because everything in his life was perfect, but because he was finally at peace with the person he was becoming. The sun filtered gently through the leaves of the park trees, casting dappled light onto the bench where Sophia and Ethan sat today. Their relationship had evolved over the months, not quite friendship, not quite closure, but something delicate and hard-earned. It wasn't reconciliation in the romantic sense, nor a rekindling of their past. It was an understanding that people could change, and that healing wasn't about forgetting, but about learning to live with the scars. For Sophia, this new chapter was one she never thought she would write. Life after abandonment had been daunting, but through the hardships, she had discovered a version of herself that was stronger, bolder, and more compassionate. She had built a business, a voice, and a life filled with purpose. Ethan had reappeared at a time when she least expected it, not to disrupt her progress, but to remind her how far she had come. Ethan was beginning to find his own way as well. Though haunted by the mistakes of his past, he had learned to carry them with humility rather than shame. His job, modest as it was, offered structure and meaning, and his volunteer work had become more than just an obligation. For the first time, he felt connected to something bigger than himself, working to make life easier for others in ways he never thought he was capable of. One evening, after a long day, Ethan found himself reflecting on how much life had changed. His old ambitions, the ruthless pursuit of success, no longer defined him. He didn't need applause, titles, or wealth to feel worthy. He had lost everything, only to find that what he gained in return, self-awareness, purpose, and a sense of gratitude, was far more valuable. As the months passed, Ethan gradually became an integral part of the disability advocacy network. People who once viewed him with skepticism came to respect his genuine desire to help, including Sophia. Though their relationship remained firmly grounded in the present, Sophia couldn't deny the growth she saw in him. He wasn't the same man who had left her, and perhaps that was enough. One day, Sophia invited Ethan to attend an art exhibition she was hosting, a celebration of the work she and other artists with disabilities had created over the past year. The gallery was alive with color and emotion, every piece a reflection of the artist's personal journey. As Ethan wheeled through the gallery, he felt overwhelmed by the beauty of it all, by the resilience, hope, and creativity on display. He stopped in front of a particular painting, captivated by its vibrant colors. It depicted a phoenix rising from a bed of ashes, its wings stretching wide as it soared toward the sky. "That one's yours, isn't it?" Ethan asked, glancing at Sophia, who stood beside him. She smiled, her eyes twinkling with pride. "It is. It was one of the first paintings I did after everything." Ethan studied the phoenix for a moment longer, understanding the symbolism without needing her to explain it. "It's beautiful," he murmured. "Just like everything you've built." After the exhibition, they shared a quiet moment outside the gallery, sitting together beneath a sky full of stars. The night air was cool, and the hum of the city buzzed softly around them. "Thank you," Ethan said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "For what?" Sophia asked, tilting her head curiously. "For giving me a chance," he replied. "For not slamming the door in my face when I came crawling back." Sophia gave a small, thoughtful smile. "I didn't do it for you," she said gently. "I did it for me." Ethan nodded, understanding the weight of her words. Forgiving him hadn't been about absolving him of guilt, it had been about freeing herself from the anger and pain he had left behind. They sat together for a while longer, the silence between them warm and companionable. There was no need to revisit the past, no need to dwell on what could have been. What mattered was the present, the here and now. As time went on, Sophia and Ethan continued to build their lives separately, but their paths intersected in meaningful ways. Sophia's advocacy work flourished, expanding into new ventures and partnerships. Her art business grew, and she began mentoring other disabled artists, helping them find their voices just as she had found hers. Ethan, too, found purpose in the work he did, guiding people through the struggles he had once dismissed. The humility he carried became a quiet strength, and though he never fully forgave himself for the choices he had made, he found solace in the fact that he was doing better now, making amends not just to Sophia, but to the world in small, meaningful ways. Years passed, and life moved forward. Sophia remained a beacon of strength, her story inspiring others to embrace change and rise above life's challenges. Ethan became a fixture in the advocacy community, respected not for his past, but for the person he had become. And though they didn't always see each other when their paths did cross, they shared a quiet, unspoken understanding, a reminder that life was full of unexpected twists and turns, and that even the hardest moments could lead to something beautiful. One day, as Sophia sat in her studio, working on a new piece, she thought back to everything that had brought her to this moment. The pain, the betrayal, the loneliness, it had all been part of the journey. But so, too, had been the joy, the growth, and the unexpected connection she had formed along the way. Her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Ethan, a simple text, thanking her for being part of his journey and wishing her well. She smiled, feeling a quiet sense of peace. Life wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But it didn't need to be. It was enough to be here, in the present, creating something beautiful from the pieces of the past. The story ends not with grand gestures or dramatic reunions, but with the quiet satisfaction of two people who had found their way through the darkness. Sophia and Ethan would always carry the lessons of their shared past, but they had both learned that forgiveness, both of themselves and each other, was the key to moving forward. Their lives, once intertwined in pain and betrayal, had diverged onto new paths, each leading to a place of growth, understanding, and peace. Because in the end, life was not about perfection or redemption, it was about finding the courage to begin again, no matter how many times it broke you. And they had both found that courage in ways they never imagined. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Click on the video now to watch. We appreciate your support, and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.